Welcome back to Areva Martin in real time. I'm Avi Bernard in for Areva Martin today. Coming up this hour, we're going to be talking to LA Times columnist Erica Smith about a very insightful article she wrote about the verdict on Mark Ridley Thomas. And we're also going to be talking about women's reproductive rights in the second half of the hour. But first, here's what you might have missed. Justice Department and FBI investigators have amassed fresh evidence pointing to possible obstruction by Donald Trump in the investigation into top secret documents found at his Mar-a-Lago home. The additional evidence comes as investigators have used emails and text messages from a former Trump aide to help understand key moments last year. Donald Trump departed from Florida on Monday for New York, where he is scheduled to be arraigned Tuesday in connection with an investigation that has centered on hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels to conceal an alleged affair ahead of the 2016 election. Trump, who is the first sitting or former U.S. president to be indicted, flew out of West Palm Beach on his jet around 12:45 p.m. Eastern this afternoon. Leonardo DiCaprio took the witness stand today in the case against former member of the Fugees, Pras Michel, and told jurors that his team vetted a key Wolf of Wall Street investor who is accused of stealing billions of dollars. Pras Michel is accused of conspiring to make illegal campaign contributions using foreign money, witness tampering, and failure to register as a foreign agent of the Chinese government. World Wrestling Entertainment, also known as WWE, is merging with Endeavor Group, which is the parent company of UFC, to form a new publicly traded company. The deal values the newly combined company at over $21 billion. Vince McMahon will retain his current WWE title of executive chairman at the new company, which doesn't have a name yet, although he was forced to retire as the WWE CEO last year following a hush money and sexual harassment scandal. The deal marks the end of WWE as a family-owned business. Vince McMahon bought the company from his father in the early 1980s. Legislation that would sharply curb press freedom in Florida is creating a rare rift between Governor DeSantis and the media that have helped propel his rise. The legislation was drafted at the urging of DeSantis and takes aim at several protections in state and federal law, including the decades-old Supreme Court precedent that makes it difficult for public figures to win libel lawsuits. Forces traditionally aligned with DeSantis have in recent weeks begun warning that the governor and his GOP allies did not take into account how the bills would affect right-wing reporters and commentators, not just the mainstream outlets and quote-unquote woke media. When we come forward, we're going to be having a conversation with LA Times columnist Erica Smith about Mark Ridley Thomas, his guilty verdict, and what it means for Black Los Angeles when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
One of the best savings rates in America. Banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions, even easier than choosing Slash to your bank.
Welcome back to Areva Martin in Real Time. I'm Avi Bernard in for Areva Martin today, and we are joined by LA Times columnist Erica D. Smith, who has just a really insightful article about the guilty verdict of Mark Ridley Thomas in the case brought upon him by the United States of America. And I just wanted to talk to you about this because it does mean a lot to Black Los Angeles in particular. In the column, it's in LA Times, it's called "Why a Guilty Verdict for Mark Ridley Thomas Doesn't Feel Like Justice to Black LA." And so, Erica, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
For sure. Thanks for having me on.
And so I wanted to first maybe lay a little bit of a foundation for those who might not be from LA. They might have moved here recently. They might not be familiar with Mark Ridley Thomas as much as many of us are, and why he might mean so much to Black LA. Why does Mark Ridley Thomas mean so much to Black Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, he has been, somebody who's been in elected office for, I would say probably definitely most of my life, even though I'm not from Los Angeles either. But, he has served roles in both the state assembly and the state senate, at the county level, at the city level. And he's had an impact. I mean, he's not just one of those politicians who's kind of taking up space. He's had a long history of actually making, policies that have actually become real. So, I mean, going back even to the 90s with the Empowerment Conference or Congress bringing people together to talk about, their issues and to push policies forward. There's the long saga over the, Martin Luther King, community hospital that was shuttered because of neglect. And, he was, a major force behind, building the one that is there now, which is considered a state-of-the-art hospital, which was, indispensable for communities, both Black and brown, during the pandemic when, you had a lot of people who didn't have health coverage that got sick because of COVID. It goes kind of on and on. A lot of his work on homelessness has been praised, which, as we know, disproportionately affects Black and brown communities. So, I mean, he has been, somebody who has really convened a lot of power and really given a voice to people who really oftentimes feel like they don't have a voice in government. And so, this case, this corruption case against him really got a lot of people's attention because he is somebody that they felt that could really help them in elected office.
And let's talk about some of the charges. I mean, you talk really eloquently in your article about how despite the fact that you're not a parent, you can see why some parents might be moved to help an adult child who is struggling, and talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so his, the charges were involving him in an alleged quid pro quo with USC to help his son, Sebastian Ridley Thomas, who at the time was a member of the state assembly, who was kind of leaving under a cloud of controversy, facing some sexual harassment charges. And apparently also some health issues as well. And so the push was to get, him a role at USC, both as a job, also as a student under a scholarship. And so the case, there were, I think, 19 counts. He was convicted on not all of them, but on many of them were involving basically awarding county contracts to help his son get that role at USC. And so, as I said, and I wrote in my column, I'm not a parent. But it was interesting throughout the several months that this case was, preparing for trial, during trial, that it was in trial a couple of weeks. Had a number of people talk to me who are parents who talked about, that they can understand, or empathize anyway with him trying to help his adult son kind of out of a jam, which I thought was interesting because, again, I don't have kids. It didn't necessarily occur to me to think of it that way. But that was something that was different than some of the other recent controversies we had on the LA City Council, where we've had a couple of other members who have been ousted over corruption charges for things that were, a lot more egregious in the sense of we had people that were taking money from real estate developers and spending it in Vegas and, the whole, the worst things you can possibly think of. So I think there was a lot of comparisons just to recent cases involving city council members and Mark Ridley Thomas, who was on the council before this guilty verdict.
And you drew some parallels to the Trump family, and the lack of accountability that they always seem to encounter, regardless of what they've done. And you have you have the Trump sons, on his campaign, and White House jobs. His son-in-law Jared Kushner, purportedly in charge of Middle East peace. Uh, thank you, Jared, for bringing peace to the Middle East finally. And I just, what do you make of that? Why do you think that Mark Ridley Thomas is facing these charges when, as you mentioned, the Trump family, and not to mention the corruption that Trump himself was done just for his own sake, for his own monetary gain? What do you make of the double standard here?
Yeah, I mean, the Trump, obviously at the time this verdict was, read against Martin Ridley Thomas, we were all preparing for the indictment that is coming on Tuesday against Donald Trump. And so it's one of those things I think a lot of people have been anticipating for quite a long time, because we've seen so much corruption, obvious corruption from him, from members of his family. And so those comparisons popped into my mind, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one as well. I think, the cynic in me, you would point to the bias in the criminal justice system, that, that Black and brown people disproportionately are, prosecuted for crimes where white people oftentimes aren't. I mean, we've seen that. We've all gone through this, talked about it far more publicly since 2020, but it's been evident for far longer than that. But I think it's been, more of a topic of discussion in the last 3 years or so. But I think that whether or not that solely is responsible for the why prosecutors went after Mark Ridley Thomas, and there's plenty of people in the community who firmly believe that is the only reason. I'm not going to speculate onto the whys of it, but I do think the perception is a powerful one. And I think that that is going to keep coming up as far as why this is the corruption we care about, as I did put that in my column. And so, I think these are issues that are going to be discussed in the community and are going to be points of contention for quite some time.
Yeah, you said, why is this the corruption we care about? And I thought that was just such a good question, because, and I want you to talk about, what the quote unquote quid pro quo that took place, did that cause any harm to MRT's constituents? Did it cause any harm to the people of LA? I mean, it's not like you said, he wasn't spending taxpayer money going to Vegas and putting it all on Black. He was, so to speak, putting it on Black in a different way.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about that.
I mean, I do think that's a question, and it's one that did, crop up to me. I don't think there's really any comparison when you talk about somebody like Jose Huizar or, Mitch Englinger, who are former members of the city council, compared to, the case involving Mark Ridley Thomas. I think some people would say that, the corruption that he has been convicted of did cause harm, in the sense of, he monetized his position as an elected official. But I think a lot of other people, particularly his constituents, would say that it didn't, because one of the interesting things that, frankly, I wasn't aware of until I actually went to, listen to closing arguments down at U.S. Courthouse downtown in L.A. was that, the crime that he was, convicted of, and the charges involved not what necessarily he voted on. It was about the conspiracy around what the charges were. So, part of what came up was that the issues or the topics that were these contracts that were in dispute with USC, one involved a telehealth clinic, one involved a reentry center, were things that he probably would have supported, and frankly, other members of the Board of Supervisors at the time supported as well, largely because most of those folks on the board, and I think probably most of his constituents, would think that those are things that would benefit the community. That wasn't the issue. The issue was whether or not there was a conspiracy afoot between him and USC. But I think if you look at it on balance, as far as what he did, what was the harm, I think most people would say that, it didn't really cause real harm to the constituents in terms of what they got out of it. I guess the harm would be this idea of an elected official using his office. And so that's up for interpretation, but I think most people are looking at it from the narrow view of what did we as constituents get out of it.
Yeah, and I totally get that too. I mean, I listen, I don't think anyone should leverage their office for personal gain for themselves or, for their family. But I do think it's important to put into context, what they were doing, with the things that were leveraged for those things. And it's important. Were they used for a trip to Bali, or were they used for something that did benefit the community? And you talked about being at the courthouse for closing arguments, and you mentioned in the article, Black pastors, Black business owners, and other Black politicians showed up in support. Some who just came down on their own, and they were anxious during the closing arguments. Can you talk about what was it like during the closing arguments in the courtroom?
Yeah, so I got there, I was a little bit late getting there, but it was at that point the main room where the trial was happening was full basically, and so we were kind of standing. I was standing with a few people in the alcove, kind of listening, waiting for them to open an overflow room, and maybe 20 minutes after they opened that overflow room, that was filled as well. And so it was really interesting just to see, who was there. In the overflow room, there's a little bit more room to kind of talk and have a conversation. Then most people were very quiet and attentive, but you could, have a little side conversation here or there without getting too many dirty looks from the bailiff. But, people were definitely there to support. A number of people I spoke to came on their own, not because they were necessarily asked. They were probably made aware that the trial or closing arguments were happening by people who were in the loop or in the know. But a lot of people came on their own, and they really stayed most of the day, or people stayed as long as they could before they had to go to work or they had to pick up their kids. And they were really, attentive to it and really were concerned and were following along and the closing arguments by prosecutors and also by the defense. So, there was definitely a lot of, attention to this case from people that I think maybe wouldn't necessarily pay attention to other types of cases along these lines. And so a lot of people had vested themselves in the outcome. And so people were anxious and people were nervous and were really wrapped up in it.
Yeah, and I have covered trials at the courthouse when I was with KTLA, and just even getting down there, and it is such a pain to your life. It is just getting down there doing anything downtown. Let's just be clear. Doing anything downtown is always like that. But especially the courthouse, you got to park in a separate lot, and then, and our KBLA Justice correspondent, Dion Raymond, was telling me that the judge wasn't giving full lunch breaks. She was just giving 20-minute breaks. And just what a mess. What a mess the whole thing was. But I do want to talk about, some of the other Black politicians you mentioned. Mayor Karen Bass said it's a sad day for Los Angeles. And I feel that sadness personally. For decades, Mark Ridley Thomas has been a champion for our city, a civil rights activist, a thought leader, and a policymaker who made real impact on this city. And you quote some others as well, but just focusing on Mayor Bass and her comments, what do you make of the first Black woman mayor of Los Angeles? And she hasn't been in office very long, but she's still, this is someone who was just convicted, and she's still coming out and giving, showing her support to him. What do you make of the show of support from Mayor Bass?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that, that so many, people who arguably have something politically to lose, right? These are people who need public support, who felt that the need to come out and say something, positive about Mark Ridley Thomas, and the mayor being chief among them. Of course, it's no secret that the two are allies and have been for many years, along with, a number of the people that spoke out in support of Ridley Thomas after the verdict. But again, this is still politics, and people, there's a risk there. And I did think it was particularly interesting how so many people came out in support of him, and not just from the Black community as well. We had former Councilman Mike Bonner, and there's Steve Soboroff from the Police Commission. There were several people who felt the need to put out a statement or to tweet or to do something. And I thought that was really fascinating, and that's something we didn't see after other cases corruption cases involving city council members. And so I think it does set this case apart differently. And frankly, as a columnist and somebody who's kind of observing LA as well as living here, I was been really fascinated to see the way that this case has kind of presented itself almost as like a litmus test or like a ink blot test where you're kind of seeing in it what you want to see in it. And so, the conversations that I've had from people from different communities, I had a number of people who reached out to me after my column who were like, it's not just the Black community that he's helped. It's other communities. It's the Asian American community. It's the Latino community. And then there's other people who disagree with me and very much were like, a corrupt politician is a corrupt politician. Throw him in jail. So I mean, I think it's this case has I don't know, in some ways put a mirror to LA and what we have and have not learned since 2020 and how we react to it. And I think the mayor's statement says a lot about that.
Yeah, one thing I didn't have this case being was a Rorschach test, so thank you for that. But I do want to talk about some of the pushback you said you got. You said not everyone was saying it's not a big deal. There are some people who are saying a corrupt politician is a corrupt politician, but on that note, do you think and I was talking to your colleague Gustavo Arellano in the last hour about whether Trump will ever see the inside of a jail cell, despite him being indicted and with future indictments likely coming. But there's a different bar. There's a much higher bar for conviction than indictment. And so do you think that obviously there's an appeal that still has to happen, and this is far from over. We were talking about that during the break. But do you think that if his appeal fails, that MRT will end up seeing prison time?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see the way the appeal goes if it qualifies and that happens. We've seen with the other person involved in this case, the USC dean, she's basically on house arrest. I mean, I could see something maybe similar for him, but you never know. I mean, like prosecutors might decide to try to make an example out of him. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I think it's entirely possible that he could serve time. And I think that's a realistic something that I'm sure he and his team are very much considering as they go through this process. But yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible. Like you said, it's a different bar for a former president than it is for a former member of the city council.
Yeah, and just that notion of making an example of the Black politician, that's very unsettling. We're always the ones they want to make examples of. Regardless of what anyone else has done, let's make an example out of this guy. And I hope that's not the case, but we'll see what happens, with the appeal. As we said, this is far from over. And Areva Smith, I just want to give you an opportunity to mention anything else that you're working on, any upcoming articles we should be on the lookout for, or ones you've written recently.
No, I mean, I've been kind of pretty much focused on this trial. I think I'll probably have one more column in me for the immediate time being related to this. But then, moving on and talking about some other things, we've got some interesting bills that are working their way through the legislature. One involving cannabis that's been authored by Stephen Bradford here in Gardenia that's looking at extending licensing abilities for social equity clients, which is something that Black and Brown communities care quite a bit about. And there's some other stuff in the works, state legislature that could affect our community a lot. So those are the kind of things I'm looking at right now.
Well, really enjoy reading your articles. Areva Smith of the Los Angeles Times, thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Definitely. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. And when we come forward, we're going to be talking about women's reproductive rights. They're under attack in states all across the country, predominantly, of course, red states. And we're going to focus on 3 cases in particular in Florida, Texas, and Idaho, and one of which will make it against the rules for girls to talk about their periods in school. These restrictions on women's rights seem to be reaching higher and higher levels in these red states, and especially when you have, people like DeSantis, like Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who want nothing more than to prove their right-wing bona fides. So we'll be discussing those things when we come forward with the founder of an organization called Period Law. Her name is Lisa White, and we'll talk to her when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580. Areva Martin in real time. I am Avi Bernard in for Areva Martin today, and we are joined by Lisa White, who is the Director of Strategy and Operations at Period Law. Thank you for joining us, Lisa.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you're able to make the time because there is legislation popping up all around the country in red states. But before we get to that, I do want to just give the people an idea of what it is that Period Law does.
Sure. Period Law is a group of attorneys for the most part. I am not an attorney. However, our organization is a group of attorneys who are trying to advance the needs of women's health as it relates to things like menstruation, equity across the board in terms of women's health. We are, a group of pro bono attorneys. Again, I am not one, but they are, and they are trying to, across the nation, advance women's health equity. That's the basis of it. Right now, we are trying to eliminate the sales tax on menstrual products. And that's one of the biggest things we're facing off against currently.
So
we're having some success, a little success.
Let's talk about the taxation of menstruation products. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't think about and aren't aware of. And so tell us about the fight for the removal of taxation for menstruation products.
It's important because there's something out here called period poverty. And the reason why we're fighting for this tax to be removed is because it will help women, menstruators, be able to afford these products. What I didn't realize, and I felt when I found this out, I felt terrible that I didn't realize this, but there are girls and young women who are missing school, who are missing out on education because they can't afford these products, but they're staying home and dealing with their menstrual cycle as best they can at home because they can't afford the products. And they're missing out on school. They're missing out on their education, and that's a horrible thing. It's their right to have an education, and it's a fact of life that they have a cycle, and they need to have the products to deal with that. You cannot. If they didn't have the products, it would be a public health crisis. They'd be sitting on buses, unprotected, and it would be a public health crisis for everyone. So let's be clear. These are necessary products. They're not luxury products. They're medical necessities. The FDA has classified these products as class 1 and class 2 medical devices. So why are we having this conversation? Why?
That's a great question. And I want to follow up, though, because I believe there are 22 remaining states that continue to tax menstruation products. And so what is the fight like? What is it about going to each individual state, the state legislature and trying to get bills passed in each individual state, or is there the possibility of federal legislation being passed in this area?
Well, there was a senator who tried to, or a representative that tried to get federal legislation passed, and it failed. So we're trying to do, and states don't like to be told what to do. So honestly, our best avenue is to go state by state. Federal legislation would be great, but in all honesty, states don't like to be told what to do. So we're trying the state by state route. And Period Law has been at this since 2017. They filed a lawsuit in Michigan, for example. In Michigan caved before the lawsuit made its way through the entire process. Michigan caved and removed the sales tax because they knew it was the right thing to do. And largely because of the period poverty piece, but also because these are necessary products that women just can't be without. And so that, so again, back to your point, 22 states left. When we started this, of course, most of the states, there are a few that did not have sales tax at all. But we're down to 22, and we're happy about that. And we're making some progress. Texas, for example, just recently passed in the House Bill 300 passed, which will remove the sales tax should it pass now, the Senate chamber, will remove the sales tax on menstrual products, diapers, adult diapers, baby diapers, and things of that nature. So, if that passes the Senate, if Texas caves, that's huge because, people like to mimic what Texas does, good or bad.
Yeah, that is huge. I mean, literally, it's huge because Texas, I believe, is the largest state by landmass and one of the largest states by population, third or fourth largest state in the country. And Texas is also a very red state. And as you said, maybe some of the smaller red states will fall in line once Texas does. But I do think it's not over until it's over. If it still has to pass the state Senate, then
exactly. That's what I said. We're not putting our eggs, before they're hatched. But so there are quite a few states that have asked us to help them work on legislation, but they're holding it like we're not quite ready. But what's Texas doing? Let us know what Texas is doing. So clearly there will be some copycats that will follow suit. So we're really hopeful that Texas will continue to push forward in the right direction.
Yeah, and I've just been given a note by our producer, Rashad, who reminded me that Alaska is the largest state by landmass. So thank you for that, Rashad. I guess
Thank you, Rashad.
I should have said in the contiguous United States. But I'm not even sure if Alaska counts because Alaska is just, it's all ice and very small population. But
exactly.
I want to talk about some of the specific legislation that is being put forth in some of these states. And we talked about Florida earlier in the show and some of the things they have going on in terms of, restrictions on the free press, in terms of even more lax gun laws, despite the continued surge in mass shootings in this country. And now there's a Florida bill that would ban young girls from discussing periods in school. And this is from the Washington Post. As Florida Republicans are introducing and advancing a wave of bills, they're now having this bill that would make it so that sex education and sexually transmitted diseases and human sexuality instruction on those topics can only occur in grades 6 through 12. And so one of the state reps, Ashley Gantz, and we have a video of this, one of the state reps, Ashley Gantz, had a question for her colleague in terms of, what this bill means for young girls' menstruation and if they do happen to experience it before 6th grade. So let's have a look at this clip.
Does this bill prohibit conversations about menstrual cycles? Because we know that typically the ages is between 10 and 15. So if little girls experience their menstrual cycle in 5th grade or 4th grade, will that prohibit conversations from them since they are in the grade lower than 6th grade?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It would.
And so this is a Democratic member of the state, the Democratic member, the state rep Ashley Gant, and she proposes this question to Rep Stan McClain, and he's the one who's proposing the legislation. So it's not as if Democrats are kind of just drawing some conclusion saying, oh, well, I think it means this, or maybe it means this. She asked him specifically, does this mean, since you're only allowed to talk about sex education in grades 6 through 12 and not before 6th grade, does this mean that girls who experience their menstruation before 6th grade are not able to talk about it in school? And he said that is correct. And I mean, and also, according to this article, there has been a surge in girls experiencing their menstruation for the first time before 6th grade. I mean, the average is, the usual range is 10 to 16 years old, but now there are girls who are experiencing as young as 8 years old. And I can't imagine how, you don't understand what's going on when you're that age and how to deal with it. And now you have the additional burden of these right-wing zealots saying you can't even talk about it. What if this happens to a little 8-year-old and she runs up to her teacher and says, it could happen in the middle of class? And and as you said, it's a health hazard, and she could be in the middle of class, and then that could be already a hard enough situation for her, and now there's this added element of it being illegal to even talk about if you're afraid, and the teacher might be afraid of losing her job or facing some litigation if he or she talks to that child about it in front of the other students. And so, but when we come forward, I want to get your take on this Florida bill when we're talking to Lisa White of Period Law here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Martin in real time on KBLA.
Our Weekly Los Angeles is the largest audited Black newspaper in the state of California, with a distribution of over 50,000 copies weekly. Pick up a copy every Thursday to get the latest news on African American communities of LA. You can also keep up with what's going on in Los Angeles and surrounding cities by going to www.ourweekly.com. The Our Weekly website is updated daily with the current news about us and for us. For your advertising needs, Our Weekly offers economical advertising packages to fit your budget. Feel free to call Our Weekly Los Angeles at 323-905-1300 or visit the website at www.ourweekly.com. Our Weekly Los Angeles, reporting news that matters to you.
The Los Angeles Urban League and Parkside Economic Development Corporation are working to close the wealth gap between Black and white households. BWARP, the Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program's free virtual workshops will help your family acquire, gain, maintain, and pass down legacy wealth. Learn from the experts about making more with what you have, the Black history of money, joining the Smart Investors Club, preserving your assets in tough times, crypto, cash in or cash out, the wealthy mind and body. Register for this free series that could change your financial future at laul.org/BWAARP. Don't miss BWARP, the Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program, every second and fourth Thursday in February, March, and April at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Register now at laul.org/BWAARP.
All I need is one mic.
For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Tavis Smiley with a KBLA editorial. I've said it all along. Presumption of innocence, fundamental fairness, due process. Convicted now on 7 counts in his federal bribery case, LA City Councilman Mark Willie Thomas scarcely got 1, and his chances of getting the other 2 were slim to none, and Slim was out of town. Did you hear the jury forewoman's comments? The jurors were confused by the jury instructions, confused by the answers to the almost 12 questions they sent to the judge. She acknowledged that some jurors were not even paying attention. And she said the jury knew that the $100,000 contribution from MRT was legal, but the way the jury instructions were written made them feel like they had to find MRT guilty of wire fraud. Again, those are her words. So let me offer you just 3 questions that I want you to ponder. 1, why do you think the U.S. government spent millions of dollars of your money going after an alleged $100,000 bribe? 2, USC is in the news almost daily, it seems, for yet another violation of some law or the contestation of somebody else's humanity. But unlike all the other cases, they didn't get caught by some LA Times investigation. No, USC walked this particular case involving a powerful Black leader into the U.S. Attorney's Office. Who made that decision, and how and why was it made? 3, while all the focus is on the indictment of Donald Trump, are you paying attention to all the other high-profile Black elected officials that are being targeted across the nation by the Justice Department? Joe Biden's Justice Department. I'll let you marinate on that for a second. The judge in one case involving a high-profile Black elected threw the charges out and told the government to kick rocks. It doesn't matter who's in charge. The hunting season for Black folk is always open. I do not purport to know what's next for MRT. What I do know is that his legacy of love and service to our community is intact. What I do know is that God can turn your shipwreck into a submarine. As for all the rest of us, be vigilant, be sober, be circumspect. Just because you don't believe in conspiracy theories don't mean they ain't after you. For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Tavis Smiley. We, of course, welcome your comments.
And we're back on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Avi Bernard in for Areva Martin, and we are joined by Lisa White, who's Director of Strategy and Operations at Period Law. And before we left, we were talking about this legislation in Florida in which sex education can only occur between grades 6 through 12. And just doing the math in my head, I believe sixth graders are usually age 11. And so if any young girl has their period before the age of 11, then if this legislation were to become law, then that little girl would not be allowed to talk about her menstruation in school. It would be illegal. So just I want to get your reaction to this Florida legislation.
Well, my professional reaction is this is unfortunate. My personal reaction was, are you kidding me? This is insane. It really sets us back. I remember back in the 70s, I'm dating myself here, but back in the 70s, when Judy Blume's books were so popular, and now we've got the movie coming out here in April, so very timely. I remember that being our source of information and that prompting us to then introduce this type of curriculum in the schools. Like, let's be clear, we need this curriculum in the school. We don't want our kids learning from each other about sex education and about menstruation. We want someone that has, some lucid information, some good, decent, accurate information. You don't want, peers teaching peers. And now we are opening ourselves up to, Florida in this case is trying to open itself up to something very, very potentially damaging. It's horrific. There seems to be this unrelentless movement or this thirst for power and control where men are trying to insert themselves in ways into women's health and girls and females in a way that just should not be. It just makes no sense. It really makes no sense. And it's could be potentially harmful. This education needs to take place within the schools. No young girl should feel ashamed. There's enough stigma, negative stigma around menstruation as already. This is going to make it even worse, where girls are going to be ashamed and hover in the corner and cry and feel ostracized and isolated. That is not the environment we should be creating for our young girls. Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's really not. And we have quite a conversation going on our YouTube channel, KBLA Talk 1580 YouTube. And there's a viewer named Tia Z who said, I've had a student who started her period at 8 years of age. Thankfully, her mom had prepared her. But that's not always the case. That is, what if her mom hadn't prepared her? And even though she had, she still might need to ask the teacher a question. She's 8 years old.
Absolutely. If it happens on the spot while she's in school, she can't ask mom about it. So she needs to be able to have a healthy conversation with a teacher or a nurse and be treated with some dignity and some care and some nurturing, not be made to feel ashamed or like she's going to get in trouble or kicked out of school for having a conversation or asking a question. This is shameful. It's just shameful.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I want to welcome to the conversation now Chelsea Von Chaz, who is the founder of #HappyPeriod. And Chelsea, I want to get your take on this legislation that would prohibit young girls who are younger than sixth grade to talk about their menstruation in schools.
It's insane, right? First of all, thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Amazing. So yeah, it's unfortunate because I mean, even with the state of California, they actually are not even making it, it's not even mandated as far as the reproductive health education, right? So it's to me it's backwards because they're not requiring students to learn about menstruation, and the curriculums that do exist, they're not requiring them to be medically accurate. So it's like, okay, we're completely silencing children from learning about their anatomy, even if they do have, even if they do have a uterus, even if they do get their first period while in school, this prohibits them from even speaking about it, so that includes if they have to go to the restroom because they need to change their pad, if they need to ask their teacher a question, or just to even, just to be a teenager or preteen, to just talk amongst their peers about periods, which is just something that even us grown folks with periods do. I mean, we talk about our periods all the time. So yeah, I mean, it's extremely backwards, and honestly, it's quite disturbing.
I just
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just curious because Florida is also the state that now requires student athletes to report their cycles to their coaches and athletic directors. How can you do both that and not talk about it? So you see what we're working with. This is not a well thought out bill. It's not a well thought out process, and they're stepping on their own toes because you can't talk to the AD or the coach about your cycle because you're trying to prohibit that. So it makes no sense.
Yeah,
exactly.
neither of those make any sense, regardless of the fact that they are opposing positions. We're almost out of time, unfortunately, and so I do just want to give a shout out to Period Law. And Lisa, if you can just tell us how people can support Period Law and the work you're doing to bring reproductive rights to even the red states.
Thanks again for having Period Law here and be a part of this very important conversation. You can check us out on our website, periodlaw.org. And there you can find a wealth of information about how you can support us, how you can get involved and volunteer. And if you're one of the 22 states that still tax menstrual products, there's a chart on there that will let you know. And you can, get involved.
We definitely want to have you back soon to talk more about this. And quickly, Chelsea, if you can just give us 30 seconds on #HappyPeriod and the work that you all do.
Yes, we're the very first Black-led organization that focuses on menstrual health education and access to period products for folks in need. We've been a part of the menstrual movement since 2015, and right now our goal is to get into a lot of these states, whether they're blue or red, but making sure they're actually teaching kids about menstruation, about their body anatomy. We're advocating for body literacy. So that's our goal. And you can find us on #happyperiod.org, and we are Happy Period on all your social media outlets.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa White of Period Law and Chelsea Von Chaz of #HappyPeriod. Really appreciate the work you're doing and for your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And when we come forward, it is the Raw Report with Robin Ayers talking about the latest entertainment news. Areva Martin will be back in this chair tomorrow, not this exact chair because I'm at my house, but you know what I mean. For now, I'm Avi Bernard and I am gone.